Welcome back. So let's talk about your data, the management of your data, and what's in the new NIMC Act 2026 and what it means for you. And joining us this morning from the National Identity Management Commission is Mrs. Uche Chigbo. She's the Coordinating Director, Operations, National Identity Management Commission, and she joins us from our Abuja studio. Good morning, Mrs. Chigbo. A very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Indeed. Now, President Bola Tinubu, when signing the new NIMC Act 2026, couldn't have been more trite when he said that the National Identity Management Commission holds the key to the trust and safety of Nigerians' data because of, the critical nature of privacy, without quoting him copiously. And so with regards to the sacredness of the data of Nigerians, what's in the new NIMC Act that guarantees protection for the personal information data of Nigerians?
Okay, before I'll go into answering your question, I'd like to provide a little bit of context. The NIMC 2007 Act has been the foundational legal framework for the existence of the National Identity Management Commission and also the implementation of the identity agenda of Nigeria. With evolving security challenges, with technological advancements, with the enactment of the Nigeria Data Protection Act, and also with the ever-growing digital economy in Nigeria, it became necessary for a critical and comprehensive review and update of that legislature. So it's that legislature, that the update that gave birth to the 2026 NIMC Act, which provides for a lot of critical areas. And I'll mention them and then I'll go straight to answering your question. The Act in itself has expanded the statutory objectives of the National Identity Management Commission and enabling NIMC to be able to administer and regulate the identity sector. One of the critical components was the incorporation of the digital identity and also incorporation of the global best practices that we have. In terms of your question, the NIMC also, the new Act has a robust data protection and privacy provisions that aligns with the Nigeria Data Protection Act. So by this new Act, NIMC is required to comply fully with the Nigerian Data Protection Act and ensure the data protection of citizens' data and also ensure privacy of data and the transactions that we administer.
Interesting. So I'm looking through, some, you call it like a dashboard highlights of what this portends for the average Nigerian. But I want to, if you call it jumping the gun, permit me. So I know that in my pocket as I sit here, if I remember correctly, except I didn't carry all of them, I have my personal ID card, I have my debit card. If you have more than one bank, you can know how many that is. My driver's license, there's a voter card, maybe in the car or in the house. Then are we talking about another additional card to the cards we have? Because it looks like the idea is about data integration at one source. Walk us through the operationalization of what this act is supposed to achieve.
Okay, the new Act is moving from a card-centric approach to identity credentials approach, giving us flexibility to issue identity credentials based on evolving technological advancements or applicable technology and some identity concepts as we move forward in the era that we are in. So that's what the Act is envisaging. And also part of the provisions of the Act is the designation of NIMC as the repository of all biometric data capture for proper identity management coordination and harmonization. Within that same context, NIMC has also been designated as a root certification authority for the national public key infrastructure. We all know that the public key infrastructure is the cornerstone of securing digital communications across board. So NIMC has the responsibility for public key infrastructure implementation and also as issuing authority, and also to implement the digital public infrastructure with the ecosystem approach that we have already embarked on. So all of these are the things that guarantees that we will issue identity credentials. We are moving from the era of just having a general multipurpose card to issuing identity credentials. It could be in the form of a token, it could be in the form of numbers, it could be in the form of mobile ID that you carry on your phones, etc. So that's where we are right now with regards to the NIMC Act.
But some of the explainers, say that you require one card for multiple possibilities. And we already have a surfeit of identities in this country. We have national driver's license, you have international passport, you have your NIN, your NIN card, you have your voter card, and this adds to it. Please explain this one card for multiple possibilities, and does it replace, in terms of authenticity, all of these cards that we already carry with us?
Okay, I want to explain that the national identification number that we issue is a foundational identity for every Nigerian citizen and legal resident in Nigeria. So what you're referring to in terms of all the other identities are classified as functional identities. These are identities that rely on the foundational identity. The NIMC identity is answering the question, who are you? While the functional identity is answering the question, now we know who you are you eligible to benefit from a scheme, to transact in this business, to access this service, to become part of a government scheme or a private sector scheme? So they are two separate entities. So the foundational identity is the valid means of ID, NIN, the valid means of ID for identifying every single person that is of Nigerian descent and is living in Nigeria or is also living in diaspora. So we need to make that distinction so that we can understand that clearly. And then moving forward, there is no replacement in terms of what we are doing. We are establishing that foundational ID, and we are saying that we are taking a new approach. We are embracing the innovation that is in the technology sector, and we're saying that we can now issue identity credentials in whatever format that is applicable or appropriate with this century that we are in. So your identity can come in the form of a card, it can come in the form of a token, it can come in the form of a credential. That's what the new act is looking at. So the new act is forward-looking, future-ready, and trying to be internationally compliant and also compliant with the global best practice.
So are we going to begin to have to obtain this one card for multiple possibilities in the near future? Are Nigerians going to begin queuing at NIMC offices to secure this card?
Yeah, there are plans in place to launch and roll out the identity credential that we will be issuing to people. I'm sure in due course, a lot of information will be given once the launch is done on how to obtain the identity credential that we are talking about. But the focus is that the NIMC Act has been strengthened, and a lot of the provisions has also been expanded to help us to administer and regulate the identity sector in Nigeria. For example, within the Act, there is the expanded mandatory use framework that the identity can be used across 14 transaction categories that has been provisioned in the Act. There's also a significant enhancement in the penalties, administrative sanctions, and also the fines that are applicable for either people who violate or breach any of the provisions of the NIMC Act in terms of unauthorized access, in terms of unauthorized usage, in terms of people who charge beyond the prescribed fee for our identity services, or people who just decide to charge fee where NIMC has not set any fee for any of the identity services. So there's a whole lot that is in the new NIMC Act. And within the next coming days or weeks, NIMC will embark on a nationwide campaign so that we can raise public awareness on the provisions of the new NIMC Act 2026, and we can also educate the stakeholders that we have on what the provisions are, what are those rights, what are those obligations, and what are those sanctions, like I mentioned. So there's going to be a whole lot that NIMC will be unpacking in the coming weeks and months, because we need the public to be compliant on the new NIMC Act. We also need to reinforce NIMC's role as the regulator of identity sector in Nigeria.
At face value, it looks very exciting, and we hope it follows through in terms of implementation, because one of the embarrassing things we have had to deal with as a nation is the inability to be able to state just how many we are. It's a question Nigeria can answer as a country. How many are we? The last time we did a census was 2006, and we've not been able to do any census, so we're just making assumptions based on birth rate and all of the analytics we use. So this is good on paper. We hope it's going to be implemented. So, but the question where I'm going to with all of this, rural dwellers, is at the back of my mind. Does this mean going forward, although it's been implemented already, but actively, there may be possibly a situation where you won't be able to do any form of transaction without having your NIMC? Or NIN, not NIMC, NIN, that's the word.
That has already been in operation since the advent of NIMC, and since NIMC Act has been existing since 2007. That has always been a provision of the Act, that the NIN is the valid means of identity for accessing government services. So if you're accessing any government service, be it in the National Health Insurance, a contributing health insurance scheme, whether you are a taxpayer, you want to pay tax, whether you're a student, you want to take examination, and all the other services that has been listed previously in the NIMC Act, they are still there, that NIN remains the valid means of identity.
Yeah, yes, that's why I was saying, maybe there's a word I wanted to add to it, but it didn't come through. So that everything, maybe you're voting, whatever it is, because we have an issue right now with the issue of the voter card. But talk to us about, you've highlighted it, which is quite important, data protection. What are we looking at? I've seen the highlight as much as 20 million and maybe 5 years imprisonment and all of that. So talk to us about how effective you expect, or the agency expects this to be, because sometimes when you put out laws, and you put out this consequence, and we don't make examples of people, it just becomes paperwork.
Well, NIMC has been collaborating with a lot of security agencies to ensure full compliance to the provisions of the NIMC Act, especially when it comes to all the penalties and punishable offenses that are captured in the Act. We are also working closely with the Nigeria Data Protection Commission to ensure full compliance, whether from our employees or the people that are accessing the identity services, that everybody who is participating in the identity ecosystem complies fully with the Nigerian Data Protection Act. NIMC is required as an organization to also comply in terms of purpose limitation, the principle of purpose limitation, where identity data that has been captured will be used for the purpose for which it was intended for. We also have the principle of consent, making sure that the consent of the owners of the data, which is you and I, are gotten before that data can be shared for the purposes of accessing services or facilitating access to services. So those are all the things that within the coming weeks we'll be operationalizing, and we will be breaking them down bit by bit to help the public understand what those provisions, what those obligations, what those rights are within the new 2026 NIMC Act.
All right. Very quickly, if you can do this in 60 seconds. In the past, there have been reports of access to the back end of NIMC and the selling of the data of Nigerians. Is there any provision in this new act that, recommends punitive sanctions and, of course, secures the back end of NIMC from illegal sale of Nigerians' data?
I would like to make a point of correction. There is no access to the back end of NIMC system. The only access that NIMC provides is access to the verification platform that enables people to authenticate and verify the national identification numbers that are being presented at the point of transaction or access to services. That's where people can access the verification platform. And I also want to put also a clarification that that platform, it's not the actual NIMC identity database. It's a mirror of people who have been enrolled and issued NIN. And we create that access for people to be able to authenticate and verify those identities before services are provided.
All right. There's more to follow up on that, but we'll have to, anchor the conversation at this point. And thank you very much for coming on the program to provide all of these insights into the new NIMC Act 2026 that repeals the old Act of 2007. Mrs. Uche Chibo is the Coordinating Director, Operations, National Identity Management Commission. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And you as well. And from here, we'll take a moment. When we return, it'll be time to explore all of the legal implications in the court order ordering the deregistration of the Nigeria Democratic Coalition, Congress rather. Stay with us for details in just a moment.